E is for existential dread. And one person who can write existential dread really well is Stephen King. So today, first, welcome to my channel. I'm Jason White, and this is Jason's Weird Reads, and today I'm going to be tackling the King of Horror, Stephen King book tag. Now, I've seen a couple of booktubers I watch doing this book tag, and I thought I should chip in because I love Stephen King. He's one of my favorite authors, even though I can be kind of critical of him. It's fine, you know, he's written a lot of books, and you can't enjoy all of them now. And so here we go. First of all, this tag was created by JessBookgirlTV, and I don't believe that I was tagged in anyone's videos to do this. Everyone knows, I guess, maybe, that I don't really do book tags all that often, unless I come across one that I think is going to be a lot of fun. I think this one is going to be a lot of fun. So, how's about we get into it? Prompt number 1, how did you get into reading Stephen King? I think this is, at least to me, it's an interesting story because I didn't start off reading Stephen King when I started reading horror. I started off with Robert R. McCammon, Dean Koontz, and John Saul. Those authors, I read a few books from each of those guys, and then I was like 13 to 15 years old, and I was like, why haven't I read any Stephen King books yet? I mean, he's like the master, right? But this is like way back in the 80s, 90s, and so although Stephen King was big back then, and he was kind of considered master of horror, there were other horror writers at the same time, like Dean Koontz and Robert McCammon, who were like right up there with him. So I did move on to Stephen King. Prompt number 2. What was the first Stephen King book you read? Now, this is a kind of a funny story because I was talking with Sin over at Sin's Book Nook, and she did this tag. And when she answered this question, I was kind of stumped myself. I was like, oh my God, what's the first Stephen King book I read? I couldn't remember. And I'm still not sure, but I did think about it a lot, and I'm pretty sure that I've narrowed it down to what it was I first read by King. Now, I do have a story. When I was in like grade 6, I think it was, I tried reading It by Stephen King, and I remember sleeping over at a friend's, and for some reason I decided to bring this honking giant book with me. And I only read like maybe 1 or 2 pages, and I was like looking at what was left, and I was like, this is too much. And I was talking about it with my friend, and he was like, you know what, it's okay if you don't want to read it because it's too big. And I'm like, yeah, I might not. So I saved it, and I read it much later. But my first book, I'm pretty sure, was Misery. I'm pretty sure Misery by Stephen King was the first book by him that I read, and it was a good one. It's I don't think it's one of my favorites, all-time favorites, but I'm fairly certain that that was my first Stephen King book. Fairly certain. I could be wrong, and I don't know why I can't remember. I remember my first Robert McCammon book, and that was Swan Song. But, you know, come to think of it, I can't remember what my first Dean Koontz book was. John Saul was Creature, because of that book I loved way back in the day. Oh well, anyway. Prompt number 3. Have you read a Stephen King book published in the year you were born? Now, this question forces me to answer a weak spot in my reading, and to also, you know, give away how old I am. His first book was published in 1974, and that's Carrie. And that would be the only book that I could read in my birth year because I was born in 1974. And no, I haven't read it. It's not a favorite Stephen King story of mine, and that's why I haven't read it yet. One reason why, anyway. And I don't know, I'm gonna tackle it one day. I'm sure I will, but that day is not today. I've read quite a fair amount of Stephen King books, but not that one. Okay, prompt number 4. Which of his books do you prefer to collect? Hardcover editions, paperbacks, or does it matter to you? And my answer for this be fairly short. I don't really care. I do have a few of his hardcover books, but I have a lot of his paperbacks too, and honestly, it doesn't really matter to me. I do have some friends who like to hunt down first edition hardcover books, and that's cool, but my books are too chaotic, honestly, and I just don't really care. Prompt number 5, how many books of his are on your bookshelf? And I have no idea. I haven't counted them recently, but I would say at least half of them, at least. Prompt number 6. Stephen King is known for long and gory novels. Which of his novels was tough for you to read? And I wouldn't say that any of his novels were tough for me to read, except for that first attempt at it, because I was too young. But I will tell you there's one part, especially in the dead zone, that was particularly hard to read. And it's the dog scene. If you've read the dead zone, you know what I'm talking about. And that's like a weakness, I think, of Stephen King's, is he likes to show who the bad guy is by them doing something awful or saying awful things. It's not necessarily, it's just part of his toolbox, honestly. But there's also scenes similar to that in It that were particularly difficult to read. So if you have anything against animal cruelty, I might consider skipping those books if you haven't read them yet. Okay, prompt number 7. Have you DNF'd a Stephen King book? The only ones I've really DNF'd were the Dark Tower series. This is an unpopular opinion, and I know I'm going to tackle the Dark Tower series again at some point, but honestly, I just couldn't get into the series. I stopped around book 3. It's I liked the first book, but the second and third book I just couldn't get into it. I just didn't like it. And so I DNF'd, I think it was the 4th book, and I never really went back. But I'm hoping to go back sometime. I'm terrible with series, honestly. And that's a weakness in my Stephen King reading, I'll admit. Prompt number 8. Have you read his books in publication order? And no, I have not. But when I was in high school, I had a friend who was attempting to do that, and I'm pretty sure they succeeded. They started with Carrie, and they went all through his list of books until where they were at present time for publication. And I don't know if they kept it up, because I never really stayed in contact with this friend after high school, as you often do. But I never have. I just always read what looks good and what I'm in the mood for. I'm a terrible mood reader. Prompt number 9. What Stephen King books would you like to read but haven't read yet? There's one that I really want to read that I haven't read yet, and it's another early Stephen King book, Christine. I don't know why I've never read it. It seems like a really awesome book. I always enjoyed the John Carpenter movie. It's a really good adaptation. Well, I don't know if it's a good adaptation, but it's a good movie. And also, I really want to read his most recent book, Fable, and his Mr. Mercedes series. I read Mr. Mercedes, but as I am terrible with series, I never continued. But I really enjoyed that first book, so I'm thinking of tackling that series again as well. All right, prompt number 10. Name a book he has written that other people liked, but you didn't. That's a hard one for me to answer, because I generally like the majority of what I read by Stephen King. I can't remember. I do have a bit of an answer for this. A lot of people would say that It is their favorite Stephen King book, and I like It, but I watched the first It movie of the recent adaptations with my wife recently, and I was bored shitless. And it's because that storyline is so old to me. It's just it's lost its boring to me now. I can't explain it other than that. So although a lot of people love that book, and I used to love it, I'm kind of done with it now. So I guess that's my answer. Next one I do have an answer for, and it's the reverse. Prompt number 10 is name a book he has written that other people... Name a book of his you think is underrated. So basically, everyone seems to either not like it or haven't read it, but I loved it. I have 2 for this one. Tommyknockers, first. I love at least the first half of Tommyknockers, and I think the people who don't like Tommyknockers, Tommyknockers you could say is a mess, and you would, if you were to read Stephen King's book on writing, you would see why it was a mess. He was like staying up late into the night, and he had like pieces of toilet paper or Kleenex jammed up his nose, and it was all bloody because he was doing so much cocaine at the time. It's an insane book, but it works, in my opinion. You got to think of it as what it is. It's a collage of stories. put into one, and it's all surrounding that town. Now, the reason why I like the first part better than the second part is because the first part follows my favorite characters more so than the second half does. But it's definitely like a collage of stories, or a mosaic, if you will, a mosaic story. And I think you have to keep that in mind when you read it. And yes, Stephen King was beyond screwed up. It was near the end of his addiction phase, where he was drinking a lot and doing a lot of drugs. I think that was the last book where his wife, when he was done that book, was like, you got to stop. They gave him like an intervention or something. But that may not be the last book he wrote while all messed up like that. But a lot of people don't like it, but I do. Another book of his that nobody seems to enjoy, but I do, is From a Buick 8. That book, in my opinion, is awesome. I absolutely loved it. I read it when it first came out, and he was criticized for that book. People saying he's just regurgitating old ideas. And the funny story about that is that comment got under Stephen King's skin, and he vowed after that he was going to retire. I don't know if he remembers, like around 2001, 2002. He was in a lot of pain because he was still healing from that accident. He probably still feels a lot of pain from that accident where he was hit on the side of the road and almost died. And so he got mad and said he was going to retire, but thankfully he never did retire. But I never understood the criticism. It's about a possessed car, Christine-esque, but it's a completely different story from my understanding anyway. I know I said I didn't read Christine, so I guess the book could actually be similar, but from my memory of the movie adaptation, it's very different, so I don't know. Anyway, alright. Prompt number 12. Creepy characters. Which Stephen King characters would you like to have dinner with? Well, I just finished reading Pet Sematary, and honestly, I would like to sit down with the Creed family from Pet Sematary. Louis Creed and Judd, the next door neighbor, or the cross the street neighbor. I would really like to sit down and have a couple beers with Judd, so I'm going to change my channel. Not necessarily, or my mind, I'm going to change my mind. And not necessarily with the Creeds or Louis Creed, but I would like to sit down and have a beer with Judd and talk about the town and the Pet Sematary. Alright. Prompt number 13. Has Stephen King inspired you to start reading and writing? And the answer to that is no. I didn't start off reading Stephen King. I would say Robert McCammon and maybe the trashy Vietnam series, Vietnam Ground Zero, is what got me into reading and kept me going. Definitely Robert McCammon, though. I absolutely fell in love with him. He was my favorite writer for like a good 10 years when I was young, when I was in my teens. So that goes to him, and Robert McCammon also planted the seed in me that made me want to become a writer as well. Stephen King certainly carried the torch once I started reading him, but he's not the source for that. Prompt number 14. If you were able to meet Stephen King, what would you say? And I think Stephen King is the most intimidating horror writer out there, period, and I probably wouldn't know what to say. I would be tongue-tied and shy, and my face would be red the whole time. It would be a bright, glowing red bulb. So I know this for a fact. If this were ever to happen, me meeting Stephen King, I would be scared shitless. So I don't know if I'd have anything to say other than, you're awesome, I love you, can I get my picture taken with you, will you sign my book, things like that. Prompt number 15. Have you ever been to Bangor, Maine? And my answer to that is no. But honestly, I would love to. I'd love to go to Bangor and get my picture taken in front of his house like all other horror fans who make it there do. Prompt number 16. Do you prefer his books? What do you prefer more? His books or movies? I absolutely love his books more, but there are some gems within his movies, some seriously good gems. Like The Night Flyer, which is an adaptation of his short story. 1408, another adaptation of one of his short stories, is another favorite of mine. And there was another one I was thinking of. Oh yeah, Storm of the Century, which was, it was a script that he wrote, and it was turned into a series, a mini-series on TV, and it's one of his all-time best miniseries ever on the television I absolutely love it. It's a masterpiece in my opinion. And final prompt, name your favorite Stephen King movies. Well, I just did, actually. So I guess I could wrap that up, because those are my favorite Stephen King movies. Night Flyer, 1408, and Storm of the Century. There's obviously there's other good ones. I used to be a big fan of The Shining, and I think this is an interesting point, because Stephen King hates the classic movie of The Shining from like the 1980s, and I thought the stories are very similar. Honestly, the stories are very similar. Where the changes is in the characters, and I think that's why Stephen King really hated that first adaptation, because Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, is a psychopath from the very beginning. You can see it in his smile and his eyes. He's scary from the very beginning, and he's a bit of a douche, honestly. But in the book, he's very sympathetic, and he feels bad for the things he does. And you sort of get the impression that in the movie, that version of Jack Torrance doesn't give a shit about anything. And Wendy's character is so weak. She's such a timid little girl compared to, the stronger, very much stronger version of Wendy in the book. So, although the classic Stanley Kubrick's version is a good movie, it's standing on its own. It's not the same at all as the book, and I don't think it'll ever be a favorite. I think there's way too many conspiracy theories about the Shining movie, and I just hate that. So what? Stanley Kubrick stacked cans facing the same way. It doesn't mean that it's proof that Stanley Kubrick was involved in some sort of conspiracy that faked the moon landing. I mean, come on, man. Conspiracy theories can really get under my skin and piss me off. Anyway, that's it. I am done this tag, and it was a lot of fun. I was right. I'm so glad I did it. So thank you for watching. If you like what I do here, please hit the subscribe button, like, and comment. And if you don't know what to comment, just leave a little clown face there in the darkness, and I will leave you some clown faces in return. Thank you for watching. Keep being safe and keep being creative, and I'll catch you guys in the next bookish video.